how did you get involved in ritual magic? Because that really is on the far edge in this culture. Medieval grimoire, golden dawn.
And, ritual magic, there's nothing unique about. Ritual magic was our basic form of activity when we were hanging around the caves and running around the jungles, picking up berries and fruits and chasing little animals and hunting and farming. We did ritual magic all the time. That was our way of life.
In order to attract
Forces and things that we wanted. And also, it serves a psychological purpose. It's not either or, of reducing anxiety. Human beings need to feel that they're doing something to affect their environment and their situation and their condition. So ritual magic is much more natural, quote unquote, than religion is. Religion is rather a very peculiar thing, and it's sort of a mass form of leadership and control. It's perfect. Its only purpose is political, but it does serve the purpose of reducing anxiety, letting you sleep better at night, praying, for an example. Why does a person pray? They want something, whether it's for themselves or somebody else. They're scared. So I reduce it, if you would, to a psychopolitical, physiological device. Magic is much more realistic for human beings because they're doing something. They're not just asking, begging, pleading, eating some wafers and drinking some wine, all in a passive position. See, religion is primarily passive. Magic is primarily active, just like science.
Judeo-Christian religion primarily passive.
That's who we're talking about. If you want to make a point about other cultures, then we can talk about those also. Those are much more magical and active. Magic is closer to science than is religion. And religion fundamentally hates both magic and science. And rightfully so.
You once said to me that magical thinking, the magical form of thinking, as opposed to linear, logical thinking, was the true natural form of operation of the human brain.
That's how it started. First of all, there's not just two forms. There's not just magical thinking, and there's not just linear, logical thinking, because we know so-called New Agers put a negative valence on logical, linear thinking and a positive valence on what they call natural thinking. However, they're not thinking at all when they discuss this. It has taken a great effort for us to be able to be logical, multi-logical, or scientific thinkers because it requires patience. We don't have immediate answers. In a survival situation, we need immediate reactions, which are different than answers. So magical thinking, if you would, is more primitive and more survival-oriented than is so-called logical thinking or scientific thinking. But that requires effort, reflection, trial and error, testing, retesting, so on and so forth.
Many people claim, think, believe in the theory of evolution. There are others, even in the modern-day world, who find the theory of evolution preposterous. This is what Dr. Hyatt has to say about the theory of evolution. Or perhaps the opposite.
In my opinion, there's more de-evolution than there is evolution. You take the finest discovery, you give a piece of gold to an ape, and what will the ape do with it? The point is very simple. One of the greatest dangers of ceremonial magic or real magical work being released to the masses is that, like everything else, the masses do with it what only they're capable of doing with it, which is reducing it to what I call trailer magic and trailer ritual. And that's what you have. I've seen just about everything in this arena. You have a bunch of monkeys running around the fire, yelping, screaming, jumping up and down. They've made little tools in their bedroom late at night, and they're having a good time, and that's great, that's cool. But that to me is de-evolution. Now, in terms of ecology and evolution, that's a totally different issue. If we look at the theory of evolution, it says, okay, the survival of the fittest, that's ridiculous. It's the survival of the most. Whatever more survives is what survives, which is a tautology. It's really the survival of the unfittest. The great, the fragile person who make up a large part of the marginal group of the world are most likely to be destroyed by the masses than be helped by the masses. Now, another point I make also, I'm worried about eco-politics for the simple reason the only way we get real change is through real disaster. I mean, the ice age, the meteors hitting the planet,
Sinking of Atlantis, the burning of Atlanta.
the burning of Atlanta, Georgia. Disaster is what brings the best of us out. What World War II did for us is simply unbelievable. And I can hear all the crying in the background, the babies killed.
But it took us to the moon.
It took us to the moon, and it will take us way beyond the moon. Out of war, out of disaster, brings the cream to the top. Not sitting around, reproducing, buying another television, painting your walls green, or hanging wallpaper, or going out and getting drunk at some silly singles bar, and everyone calls that wonderful romance, love. To me, it's garbage. All human beings do as a group is they dress up. They glamorize and dress up the ordinary. It works for the reproduction bias. You glamorize, you put glitz, you take sex and make it a gigantic romantic thing where you have to get a priest to bless you so you can legitimately look at their dirty parts. Now, come on. Don't you think that is a bit insane? It is only the rare person who can take the dross and make something more out of it. It's like having 5 children, and no matter what you say, they really turn out to be just nothing. So what? Big deal. What have you accomplished? Versus working your brains out, changing yourself, raising one child, helping that child to develop its natural qualities, and giving it more, teaching it more, providing discipline, and creating a work of art. A child should be a work of art, not simply some biological necessity that any moron can make happen. You know, I'm so overwhelmed and perplexed when someone says, "Oh, the miracle of birth." I respond, yes, the 6 billion miracles facing us now.
If a single person buys the Golden Dawn, does Tibetan tantrism, anything serious, how do they protect themselves from the outside influences like that?
It's not a hard question. It's none of anybody's business what you do. If you're anybody's property, you're your own property. And as such, you should do whatever you feel is appropriate for your development and well-being. Why would I need to tell my mother what I do? You know why? Because that's the way it's set up. The whole setup is to be set up to be controlled. And if the controls don't appear external, that is even better. You want them inculcated, internalized, so the authorities don't have to rely upon their representatives
They rely on you.
They rely on you. You are their best representative. If you get out of hand, then there are other representatives. You see, it's a circle. It's a circle of constriction. Then when you get out of hand, they escalate. Higher and more powerful people and technology then get involved in controlling you. But they rely on you through the inculcation of the superego, as Freud would call it. The identification with the aggressor is the key phrase. As children, we learn to identify with those things that aggress against us. By identifying with them, it gives us a sense of power and we feel less frightened. When we do identify with them, we take on their personalities and characteristics. So every time I have a thought, I have multiple sensors come in and censor that thought. And every time I'm about to do something, I have multiple sensors come in and analyze what I'm about to do. As far as I'm concerned, theology belongs in the Department of Archaeology or the Department of History, where you study primitive belief systems. As such, all you can say is so-and-so said this, this happened at this time, but that's all it is. It's just history, archaeology, something that primitive creatures happen to have been involved with.
What do you think of the Buddhism? What do you think of Shinto? What do you think of Taoist? Is any of it real?
It's real that the earth is flat. And I only mean that by it's real that people believe the earth is flat. That's real. That people at one time believed the earth was flat. Is it real at another level? Obviously not. Although there's still the flat earth society, I believe. So if you're asking me, is something real because people, quote, believe in it? The answer, it's true that people believe in it, and it's real that they believe in it, but it's not real because they believe in it. Are there valuable techniques and methodologies within these systems? Sure. Valid for what purpose? To get over yourself. That's the whole purpose of undoing yourself, is to identify your true nature, identify how you were conditioned, brought up, imprinted on, to see all those things that you personally regard as holy, find all those things out and then destroy them. And if you have to destroy yourself, or what you call yourself, in that process, then hurry up and get it over with. It does take a lot of work. Once you've gotten rid of the old building and much of the rotten foundation, then you're a gourmet. And I mean a gourmet of techniques. Any system that has a technique that can work for you, you steal it. You utilize it. But you have to search through so much garbage to find them as a rule. Once you find it, you take the gem, you stick it over here, you take the rest of it and throw it in the fire. Burn it. We have to make most books big because otherwise we can't sell them. In reality, most books, as Nietzsche and other great minds have said, can be summed up in one paragraph. The essence of the book is one paragraph long. Burn the rest of it. The techniques that we're going to discuss today are: 1, regular deep breathing as taught by Dr. Rigardi, myself, and other people. 2 techniques which I developed, one on tarot and the other one utilizing your computer. That technique is very powerful. The 4th technique is what is called paradoxical breathing. This is a very powerful technique, and if you practice it over and over and over again, you will cause brain change. In other words, the brain chemistry will change, and the neurological connections in the brain will also begin to change, and they will become permanent over time. Say, for an example, if you had epilepsy, there are probably a lot more ways of getting rid of epilepsy than I'm aware of, but you can get rid of it chemically and you can get rid of it with surgery. If you take a drug like Neurontin, you have to continue taking that drug in order for the seizures not to continue. When I talk about technique, once the change has taken place, you really don't have to do it again. But that's the tricky point. That's the tricky place. You don't know for sure when those things take place. Now, the other way of getting rid of epileptic problem is, of course, surgery. They remove or fix the lesion. Now, that's more what we're concerned about. We want to remove unpleasant stupid classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and imprinting. For those who don't know what those things are, I suggest reading a good introductory book on experimental and or laboratory psychology. Breathing deeply is very important, and doing it correctly is even more important. So let me demonstrate. Using the stomach, diaphragm, and chest, we breathe. We do not start with the chest. We start with the lower belly. And what we do is first inhale from the lower belly. Ah. When I said the ah, that was a signal to let all the breath out. Not force the breath out, but let the breath out. Up to the point of saying ah, I was taking the breath in from the belly into the chest. I was not forcing the chest to bring in the air. I was allowing it to rise as I moved the muscles from the lower centers to the higher centers. So we'll do that again. Ah. Now when I say ah, I let everything drop. I do not force it. I'll be repeating myself because this is so important. If you do the breathing wrong, you will not get the results you are supposed to get. We do not want to do paradoxical breathing, although that's another technique, but too complex for today. We are doing proper bioenergetic breathing, as Dr. Rigardi taught me and as his teachers taught him. So again, we're going to do it. We're going to start with the lower belly. Ah. Now, before we do our tarot work with the major arcana, we would like to do that slowly. No rush, no forcing, about 10 to 15 times. We want to relax. We do not want our mind drifting and running away and going into all sorts of strange ideas and fantasies. Now we're going to go to our computer. We're going to go to Explorer or Netscape or whoever you're using and go on to Google search engine or another excellent search engine. And what I want you to do is look up the words personality disorder, 2 words, put quotes around them, that might help, or character disorder or disorders, and you will find a number of pages come up. Within the first half a dozen, you'll find a number of references to various types of personality disorders. One of these references will have in it a very short test. If I recall correctly, it's a yes and no test, so it should take you about 10 to 15 minutes to fill this questionnaire out. You push the submit button, it'll go back to the computer that's doing it, and it'll provide you with a list of personality disorders. Possibly 2 to 10 or 5 or 7, whatever is set up on that particular system. It will tell you the one which you're most like. So say in your case, it came out that you were a paranoid personality disorder. That was the most likely. Now, going back, I want you to read everything from the 6 or 7 sites on paranoid personality disorder. I want you then print it out and study it. Study it very carefully. Now what I want you to do, since this has decided that this is most likely what your personality structure is like, I want you to consciously recognize each and every one of these characteristics that the description provides you. Make a checklist. If it says you're suspicious of your spouse, highly suspicious of your spouse, what I want you to do is check that. So now what I want you to do is to exaggerate the suspiciousness of your spouse in your own mind. When you find yourself, in fact, being overly suspicious of your spouse, I want you to make a mental note that that's what you're doing. This is what I'm doing. Whether your wife or husband is doing anything against you or not is irrelevant. Makes no difference, particularly if you're paranoid personality. Because paranoid personalities love it. There's always truth behind the paranoid's delusions. Well, that's cool. But what we're trying to do is undo you. We're not trying to protect you. We're not trying to keep you the way you are. We're trying to undo you. Now, once you've completed that and taken on all those characteristics, at least in your own mind, and identified that behavior in your own mind, I want you to go back to the test results and see what comes next. Say the next thing is a borderline personality. Want you to take on, learn, define every characteristic of that borderline personality, whether it is you or not. If it's not part of your nature, take it on anyways. Learn it, become it. Once you've done that, then I want you to go to the next one and keep on going to each and every type. I think there's somewhere between 7 and 10 types, depending on who you reach, until you've gone through the entire group. And if you do this religiously, what you'll find out is that you'll start automatically catching yourself acting out the things that other people make you. Because your personality disorder, which we all have in one form or another, is something both your genetics to some degree and your environment turned you into. So this is called the de-victimization technique. I have found that when people religiously follow this, they can almost do away with any form of external consultation in regards to their lives, in regards to their lifestyle, and in regards to how they interact with other people. In certain cases, you might find something called a dual diagnosis. That there'll be two that you're really heavy on, that you score really heavy on. For example, one could be paranoid personality, dual diagnosis, alcohol. So even if you're not an alcoholic and don't drink, take on those characteristics. The idea is to bring out all that is in your unconscious, all that is in you, all your habitual traits and characteristics as quickly and as rapidly as possible. Now, if you're not up to this kind of thing, don't do it because it can really hurt. I don't mean hurt you. You will really feel bad about some of these things once you identify them. You might even feel terribly ashamed. That's okay. It's one of the things you're also going to learn from this exercise is how to use the superego. That is the interjected, that means taking in like an amoeba, the values and consciousness of this society and of your parents. You know when the superego is talking, anytime you feel shame, embarrassment, or anytime you hear the word should in your mind, shouldn't have this, shouldn't have that, might do this, mostly the word should. Aaron Hornite had a phrase called the tyranny of the should. Fritz Perls, we worked with that whole concept in his Gestalt therapy. So keep it in mind. You can identify the superego. The idea is not to destroy the superego, but steal its power. Because that superego helps you survive in the world. that you are living in as a youngster and as an adult. So the idea here, we're now very clearly, is not to destroy the superego, but to steal its power away from its creation and give that power to you, the person that you're developing into.
He's stopping. I was up.
Dr. Hyatt, let's start talking about masturbation.
Well, first, let me thank you for flying in. The weather here in the islands is beautiful today. I hear the weather on the mainland is a little cold, and I'm not looking forward to going back. But, as you know, I must. We must get the Black Book out, the new Black Book. In regards to masturbation, it seems that many people, no matter how enlightened they think they are or appear to be, still have certain twinges regarding this subject. Back in 1758, a Swiss physician, I think his name was Desatt, posited that masturbation was the cause of all madness. And frankly, many people today still believe this. I recently read of a young boy committing suicide after he masturbated. Apparently, he was a member of a fundamentalistic church and had gone to see their religious counselor regarding his preoccupation with masturbation. And after his therapy session, went home, masturbated, and then cut his wrists and bled to death. Throughout recent history, we've had people like Dr. Graham of the famous grain cracker family and Dr. Kellogg of cornflakes assert that eating spicy food or interesting food was the cause of masturbation. Dr. Graham suggested that no man should ejaculate more than 12 times a year, even during intercourse. So both invented a food, the grain cracker and cornflakes. Cornflakes is sometimes called by the more humorous moral fiber or porn flakes. With that aside, masturbation in the Bible, in the Old Testament, of course, is the spilling of seed, which is a sin. And for the Jews, the spilling of seed was considered to be a direct affront to God, as the purpose of the seed, of course, was to make more little Jews to follow the dictates of Moses. In the New Testament, there's very little mention of masturbation, and the Christians have a wonderful time in dealing with that problem. For them, it is a problem because they're very much against it, and they don't want to rely on the Old Testament. So what they've come up with to solve the problem is the Sermon on the Mount. They mention that Jesus talks about lust in the heart as being equivalent to or even worse than committing a horrible act. And as such, from there they segue right into masturbation because it's in the mind with the images and the fantasies where you're committing the real sin against God. You're having these horrid images and fantasies. In an attempt to counter that, we here at Falcon and Dr. Regardi, when he was alive, discussed and developed techniques for using masturbation as a form of Western Tantra. I believe I mentioned that in one of my books, I think Secrets of Western Tantra, but I didn't dilate on it. So we'll talk a little bit more about using masturbation as a Tantra technique, and also we want to assure that we've extinguished any fearful or anxious response to the idea or the act of masturbation. So if you find that you do have any associations that relate to fear or anxiety concerning the act of masturbation, I think it's time that you sit down and make a list of what these thoughts and associations are and trace them back to their origin. And then I think that when you do masturbate, and I think you should masturbate if you do have a problem with it or anxiety concerning it, I think you should masturbate frequently. As Ricardi said, if tempted, yield. And he meant that quite literally in that context. I think you should masturbate frequently, but the purpose of that is to help you extinguish any anxiety or concern regarding any sexual prohibition that was inculcated in you during childhood or adolescence, either by your parents or your teachers or the culture in general. So the purpose of it is that you masturbate in order to bring out not just your seed, but bring out the origins of your problems. One of the things that we want to do after we have our list of anxieties or fears regarding masturbation is to do the following technique. We call this the laughing breath. The laughing breath is designed to break up tension in the face and in the jaw, and particularly in the top of the chest, and to free the belly. It goes like this. You first take in a nice, clean, simple breath, and then you go, ha, 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 ha. We'll do it again. Ha, 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 ha. Now do that about 5 or 6 times. Follow it by doing this. Take in the breath again. He, 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 he. He, 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 he. Make sure all the breath is out before you take in the new breath. Do that about 5 or 6 times, followed by ha 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 ha. Do that at least 5 or 6 times, or until you spontaneously start to laugh. Once you have this technique down, go back and masturbate. And when you're done masturbating, clean up, get rid of the evidence, and then simply start laughing. Using that technique, if you need, as loud and as hard as you can. Just laugh yourself silly. You might notice a number of things going on. You might notice later in the day that certain thoughts or ideas pop into your mind that are rather new to you. It's a good idea to make a list of those and go over them at a later time. You also might notice that the next time you masturbate, it may be either very difficult for you to do so, or a lot easier and, more significantly, a lot more pleasurable. So the important thing here, the principle here is, with anxiety or fear or thoughts which indicate that there's anxiety or fear behind something, is to pair up with it the opposite response. So we know if we're anxious or fearful or judgmental, we're supposed to be very serious. Well, don't let yourself become serious. As soon as you feel anxiety or fear, and you're in a safe environment, in other words, don't do this in the supermarket, as one of my listeners had, make yourself laugh. Do anything, make it artificial. It doesn't matter if it's artificial. It brings all the muscles, it brings all the brain tissue, all the necessary chemicals into play, and sooner or later, you'll be able to laugh at the drop of a hat. If you have the time in the morning, you can follow working with the face with an exercise that we have discussed before, bringing your shoulders to your ears as high as you can and holding it until you just really feel the tension. Really feel the tension. Feel the heat and the warmth. And then dropping it. Pull the shoulders up as if you were a turtle trying to cover your head. Now while you're doing that, slowly turn your head to the right. Slowly turn your head to the left. Let your head go back, but at the same time, keep the shoulders up, even to the point where your arms are shaking. In other words, be antagonistic. Fight against your head's desire to go back to the left and to the right. Force your head to go forward, but fight it going forward. Do that, and then drop your shoulders. Now, I want you to be aware of all the sensations that you are now feeling after you've done that. And if you have your eyes closed when you do that, you may even have visual after images or sense a clear white light in the area of the ajna chakra, or you might notice some intensities occurring in other areas of your body. Do that a couple of times. Now what I want you to do is slowly turn your head to the left, slowly, until you can feel strain in your neck. Now slowly move your head and turn it to the right. You can also be making faces while you're doing that. Some people, as they're turning their head to the left and right, will sometimes have their head go around and around. And some people will feel a minor sense of tension release. Other people will feel slightly nauseous. If you feel slightly nauseous and you don't like that feeling, throw up. That's good for you too. That also breaks up moods. Throwing up deliberately, which we'll discuss in more detail on the next CD, is very, very, very important. I believe I brought the gag reflex up in one of my books, but it needs to be discussed in detail. There's a lot of mistakes that people make in that area. So we worked on our neck, we worked on our shoulders, and we worked on our face. Also, it's a good idea if you can in the morning, because the morning often sets the tone for the entire day, is to play music which you want to affect your attitude for the day. That is, if you're going to be doing something very significant, you may want to put on music which symbolizes that. If you're going to be doing something that requires you to be quiet and laid back and listening, you might want to put on music of that kind. You, of course, know what affects you, because music is very, very important. If you're ever severely depressed, or even mildly depressed, or very bored, or if you have what is called writer's block, or any kind of block, like before you go out on a date, do the face exercise and do the shoulder exercise. You'll be amazed how much freer you will feel, how much more spontaneous you will be. You won't be reflecting on the screen in your mind. You'll just be responding naturally to the situation. And this brings us to a very important point. Most people respond to, quote, their own voices in their own mind. So what happens when you do that? You're not here in the present. You're in your mind. You're in your interpretations. You're in your labels. This limits you. It limits you from opportunity. It limits you from enjoyment. Again, the face exercise will break all of this up. Use the face and the shoulders before you take on any significant activity. Whether it's going for a new job, whether it's going for an examination. In other words, so little actually takes place in your so-called deliberate consciousness We want to get you out of that so-called reflective state for a moment and get you back into your natural consciousness, because all the work is being done out of consciousness. So the concept of higher consciousness is actually absurd. What you want is to trust all the things and all the experiences you had all your life that are there, that relate and react to the here and now and to reality, to be in charge, and not all your anxieties, which are often reflected by the mind chatter that continually goes on in most people's brains day in and day out, night in and night out. I received a number of questions about the breathing exercises. Most people don't have any problems or any bad reactions to the breathing exercises, but some do. And for those that don't, it's important to be aware of a few things, which we didn't cover on the last CD nor in Undoing Yourself. As you know, proper breathing exercises are one of the main things in the Undoing Yourself regime, as well as in the extreme black books and the Psychopath's Bible. Proper breathing is very important. Some of the effects of proper breathing, which scare people from time to time, are the feeling of anxiety or the feeling of falling apart. Don't worry about it. That is part and parcel of the entire process. And by the way, we are doing these exercises to help us fall apart a bit. I got one letter from someone in Europe stating that their friends noticed that they weren't behaving the same way as they used to. They weren't as easygoing as they used to be. Now, in that particular case, I don't know why, or if it had reached an extreme, or it was just part of the natural process. I don't know who this fellow's friends were. But anxiety and the feeling of falling apart is not unusual. Don't be concerned about it. The other thing that happens is spasms in the hands and in the feet and in the wrists, as well as tingling in the feet, like little bugs are crawling all over you. This is also common. Sometimes people will break out into hysterical laughter. I remember getting one letter from somebody stating that they were scared to death because they started laughing after they did 15, 20 minutes of deep breathing, or proper breathing as we do it in Undoing Yourself. Nothing to worry about. Another possible reaction is lightheadedness, and Dr. Rigardi always warned that you shouldn't drive a car or fly an airplane for at least 10 or 15 minutes after the session was over. He also would offer people a piece of candy because sometimes deep breathing will lower the blood sugar. So keep that in mind. Some people will get ringing in the ears, they'll get blurry vision. Some individuals will have a very dry mouth, tingling around the heart. They'll note later in the day that muscles will start jumping around and twitching, and they may develop a temporary tic. Again, don't be concerned about it. You'll note also that for a short period of time after an Undoing Yourself session, your reaction time will be slower. Your depth perception may be slightly off. There may be blurred vision. But, as I said, it is not anything to worry about. If you ever get out of control during a session, have, as I mentioned elsewhere, a nice little bag around and breathe into it and inhale back the byproducts of your breath, and that will slow the process down or reverse it rather immediately. Complete breathing is very important. Most people tend to either breathe from the top of their chest, which is very bad. You'll find that a lot with women. I would suggest that you avoid doing that. You want a full breath, which starts from the abdominal area, moves through the diaphragm and up through the chest. When you're breathing normally, like around the computer, and you find yourself just using your top muscles, take a very, very deep breath. Try to break up the tension. Again, not only does the face become a mask, the body becomes a mask. You'll note when people walk or their mannerisms, it's almost as if they're robots, automatons. They've become fixed in their presence. Their whole life is fixed. Their walk is fixed. So one of the exercises is breaking up your fixed body. And you can do that often by simply just taking a gigantic breath and going, letting go. Letting go is very important. Now, in terms of the fixed body, let's go back there for a minute. Make sure you take a few minutes 3-4 times a day. Stretch your head, move your neck around, move your head around, move your shoulders, move your arms, move your legs. And when you get up to walk, see if you can notice your fixed walking position. Notice how people tense themselves and get ready to walk. Now, what are they really doing here? They're getting ready to walk. Why? They're standing up. They're in a vulnerable position, and they also want to present themselves as being powerful, as being tall, of being safe, of being a threat. You need to break these things up. You do not need to be chronically on guard, particularly when we go into social situations. Whether you like it or not, most people are tense and on guard. I want you to begin to learn to trust yourself. You don't need this armor, this constant tension, in order to defend yourself if it's ever truly called for. If you're relaxed, you'll do a much better job in defending yourself because you can respond to the reality of the moment rather than what you think the reality of the moment is going to be. If you'll notice, the greatest martial artists in the world really don't use a fixed orientation. They're relaxed. They approach a situation in a relaxed manner. They're ready to respond to the moment rather than going through a million designed routines which don't take into account the inherent randomness of life, the inherent spontaneity of life. So try to break up your fixed patterns and begin to trust in this very ancient mind of yours, this very ancient brain, which has learned so much, not just in your lifetime, but in all the lifetimes the human brain has been evolving and growing and developing. Let's get back to discussing breathing for a moment. Our goal is to have a complete, full, and proper breath. So we want to begin with the belly, as I said earlier. Invoke the diaphragm, bring it into play, and then the chest. And this does not have to be exaggerated. It shouldn't be exaggerated except if exaggeration is part of the technique that you're going to be using. There are some people who primarily breathe with their belly, or primarily breathe with their diaphragm, or primarily breathe with their chest. We don't want this. We want a full and complete breath. Just imagine you're sucking the air in from your anus, and it's going right to the top of your forehead and blowing itself out into the universe. And just imagine again sucking in a fresh breath from your anus, blowing it out through your head, and filling the universe with your own blissful joy.